In November 1991, the basketball legend Magic Johnson would shock the sporting world by announcing that he was retiring from the NBA due to having tested positive for AIDS. Following this shock announcement, Diddy would reportedly get an idea to organize a charity event to raise money for the fight against the virus, which was becoming a major epidemic in the US during the early 90s. Diddy would ask a good friend, Heavy D, real name Dwight Myers, to participate in the event, which would be a celebrity basketball game and a concert that would include names like Boyz II Men, Run DMC, and Big Daddy Kane, all major names in New York's bustling rap scene at the time. The event would be held in the gymnasium of the City College of New York, located in Harlem, which at the time had a capacity for about 2,700 people. For the event, Diddy would authorize the printing of 2,000 tickets to be sold in advance, which according to the flyer for the event could be purchased at two locations: a clothing store called Boss Emporium, which was owned by infamous Harlem drug kingpin Kevin Childs, and the famous Apollo Theater in the heart of Harlem. Now, the first problem would arise from the fact that Diddy had seemingly added the Apollo Theater as a purchase location without first asking the theater. They would apparently decline the offer, as it was in fact owned by a company that was a competitor of the Kiss FM radio station, whom Diddy had retained in order to advertise the event. This relatively minor plunder would become exemplary of the rather nonchalant and negligent attitude that the organizers as a whole seemingly had towards this event. Another such example being the fact that Diddy would later admit that he had not read in depth the promotion contract that he had actually signed, and wasn't seemingly aware that he was actually in charge of buying insurance for the event, or the fact that there was seemingly no organization to whom part of the proceeds would be donated to, as the organization that was mentioned on the event's flyer could not legally accept this kind of donation, nor had they even allegedly been asked if such a donation would be possible. There was also seemingly confusion amongst the different parties as to who would be in charge of the security and how many guards would be attending the event, the actual number in the end being seriously undersized in relation to the size of the crowd that would turn up. On the day of the planned celebrity game, crowds would begin forming already several hours before the start of the event, which would actually surprise the security personnel who weren't expecting so many people. The gathering crowds would be split into two lines: those who had already bought tickets in advance and those who were looking to buy tickets from the gate. And at first, things appeared to be going smoothly despite the number of people looking to gain entrance to the gym being much larger than what the organizers expected, and in fact much larger than what the gym's maximum capacity even was. However, things would begin to unravel fast when the celebrities began arriving to the event, with the arrival of Mike Tyson and LL Cool J bringing the crowd to a frenzy, as Gene Deal, Diddy's former bodyguard, would later describe to DJ Vlad during an interview.
I did a walk around, so I walked around the top of the floor, went down the steps and went in the gym, and then came across the gym, and I seen that you can go up the steps and be right there at the front door. Everybody was coming in. You seen Dougie Fresh, Red Alert, they was on the mic. People started coming in and everything. It was cool. And then when LL Cool J and Mike Tyson showed up, that must have went pandemonium.
The crowd would begin to push towards the entrance, soon overwhelming the security and gaining entrance to the gym. Unfortunately, as the crowd surged into the lobby and down a short staircase into the gym, at the bottom there were 4 inward opening doors that were closed. This created a deadly bottleneck where the pressure of the crowd still pushing towards the doors would soon begin to cause breathing problems to the people stuck at the bottom. And apparently Diddy himself would actually manage to open one of these doors and would begin to pull incapacitated people onto the gym floor. Diddy would later apparently describe some of these events to a reporter, explaining that he had to overcome his initial revulsion towards a passed out man with vomit in his mouth. Diddy would apparently wipe the vomit away and begin to administer CPR, saying how he felt the person's death going inside of him. In the end, this tragic event would result in 9 people losing their lives and 29 people getting injured. The following day, the horror of the event became front page news all over the country. And in the coming days and weeks, the New York newspapers would make several pages-long special reports on the events that led up to this tragedy, with the headline of one of these reports asking, "Where's the money?" as the journalists weren't able to find the donation for the alleged AIDS nonprofit that was supposed to be receiving part of the event's proceeds. Also, Diddy from the beginning would be under major scrutiny, as journalists begun digging into matters like who was responsible for the undersized security detail, the oversized crowds, and the missing charity money. And they would even interview people from New York's rap promoter scene who were familiar with Diddy's past events, with one promoter describing the situation as dangerous and unruly. This would be the first time that many New Yorkers will become familiar with Diddy's face, as he and Heavy D would do their own damage control, attempting to explain how things could have gone so terribly wrong. Diddy would seemingly attempt to push the blame on the police, who had been apparently incredibly slow to respond to the events of that evening, and some had even refused to enter the gym after there were already reports of people passed out, as the gym, according to the police, was actually the city college's responsibility. One article would even point out how this tragedy had derailed Diddy's rocket-like rise to the top of the rap industry, whilst describing Diddy as a classic overachiever, not shy about stepping on other people's toes to get what he wants. In the aftermath, then New York City Mayor David Dinkins' administration would release a comprehensive 67-page report titled "A Failure of Responsibility," which would actually place blame on all of the parties involved in the tragedy, including including Diddy, who the report would criticize directly for delegating all of the work to his inexperienced assistants, employing an inadequate number of security personnel, failing to inform the crowd that only those with advance tickets would actually be permitted onto the premises, and creating inappropriate marketing by mentioning a charity cause without actually making specific arrangements to donate towards such a cause. However, as soon as Diddy had been placed under the scrutiny for what happened, he would also seemingly be let off the hook, and already, just a few years later, the media would begin putting out what seemed like puff pieces, where Diddy was presented as somebody who had vindicated himself of all wrongdoing, and his career behind the scenes of the rap industry would actually continue to prosper.
I'm famous for like the kid in their minds who threw the tragic City College, man, and that's kind of hard for me sometimes to live with. In the first couple of days when it happened, there was nobody to really answer for what was going on, you know what I'm saying? So I think the media and everybody was trying to figure out why this happened.
In 1999, the families of some of the victims would at least get some vindication, as the promoters of the event were actually found negligent and 50% responsible for the tragedy that unfolded, while the City College were found to be responsible for the other half, and both parties were ordered to pay for the damages to the families of the victims. However, for Diddy, who was already a millionaire at this point, paying a few $100,000 hardly seemed like a real punishment for the loss of 9 lives, and meanwhile, he would continue causing havoc in the industry. By autumn 1992, Diddy was riding high after signing his latest talent, the notorious B.I.G., aka Biggie Smalls, whose debut album Ready to Die was nearing completion, but there was a problem. Uptown's distributor MCA Records deemed the album's lyrics to be too explicit and refused to release it. Frustrated and disheartened, both Diddy and Biggie voiced their disappointment, which according to the Uptown Records founder Andre Harrell was the real issue that ultimately led to Diddy leaving Uptown Records in late 1992, as Harrell didn't want to be the one to tell the new generation what was acceptable and what was not.
And the final straw for me was when MCA wanted me to not put out the Biggie Smalls album because they didn't like the subject matter, and they wanted me to tell him he's got to change his tone. And it wasn't up to me, I felt, to tell a generation what they could and could not do artistically.
Determined to keep pushing forward, however, Diddy channeled his ambition into launching his own label, the now iconic Bad Boy Entertainment, in early 1993. Wasting no time, he built up an impressive lineup of artists, and by September 1994, Bad Boy had released Ready to Die. Biggie's groundbreaking album resonated deeply with hip-hop fans, solidifying itself as a rap classic and receiving perfect reviews from some of the industry's most respected outlets. This marked the beginning of a meteoric rise for Bad Boy, which quickly became one of the biggest labels in hip-hop throughout the 90s, with a roster that included Craig Mack, Biggie Smalls, Lil' Kim, and The Lox. Bad Boy amassed a catalogue of hit singles and critically acclaimed albums that would dominate the charts, and Diddy's influence extended well beyond music, establishing him as a celebrity and prominent figure in the New York social scene. But unfortunately, in the early 90s, a fierce rivalry also erupted between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records, due to their association with two of hip-hop's biggest stars at the time, Tupac Shakur on Death Row and Biggie on Bad Boy. The rivalry between Death Row and Bad Boy escalated significantly following the tragic shooting of Jake Robles, aka Big Jake, in 1995.
I'm just gonna kick a little something. Everybody wanna know why people bang, why people kill, why people do this, sell dope. And you can't just look at the individuals, because you know, you have to look at the environment that they're set in that creates these conditions for them to have to live and do the things that they do. And so we just kicking it like that. You know, we ain't out here essing on our chest, but you know, it's like everybody out here want to be a tough guy, killer, a gangster, you understand? But most of the killers and gangsters I know either got all day or dead. So everybody out here just living. So, you know, we kicking it from that perspective.
At one time they were friends, but ultimately after this, Diddy and Death Row co-founder Marion Suge Knight found themselves on opposite sides after Big Jake, Knight's friend and security guard, was killed outside an Atlanta nightclub following a confrontation with the Bad Boy entourage. The incident unfolded at the Platinum City Club, where both camps were celebrating musician Jermaine Dupri's birthday. Tensions apparently flared during that night, and later on, an argument erupted, turning the situation chaotic and ultimately leading to Big Jake being shot, with the assailant then fleeing the scene. This deepened the rift between the two record labels and intensified the atmosphere of hostility that would plague the hip-hop community in years to come. Big Jake would pass away weeks later at an Atlanta hospital, and Diddy would deny involvement in the shooting, which Suge Knight reportedly held him responsible for. Diddy's bodyguard, Anthony Wolf Jones, would be a person of interest in the case, with multiple witnesses, including an off-duty police officer, alleging to have seen him fire the shot that killed Robles. Wolf himself would actually be killed in 2003 following an altercation with BMF founder Big Meech. According to Trey D, a rapper from Snoop Dogg's G-Funk group, the Eastsiders, the murder of Robles was the last straw in the Death Row Bad Boy beef.
Well, who got killed in Death Row? I mean, obviously Tupac.
Well, Jake Robles got killed.
Jake Robles?
Yeah.
Who was that?
The one that got killed at the party in Atlanta.
Oh, Suge's friend.
Yeah.
Aha.
Yeah.
Were you around during that
Jake
time?
was a good dude, yeah. Jake was a good dude.
So was that like Suge's like best friend or?
He was a good friend of him. He was a very good friend. You see them together often, and I think Suge trusted him a lot.
Okay. In the Jake Robles incident, they actually showed, you know, him getting killed, and then, you know, Suge being there. And I guess Puffy was there at the club also, and Suge started blaming Puffy for the shooting. Was Jake getting killed? Was that like the straw that broke the camel's back in a way with Suge and that?
Seemed to be. It seemed to be. You know, I wasn't familiar with the details, but the party that he attended, it was a lot of industry people there. He was supposedly looking for Suge or waiting for Suge or something, and in the process, it was a flare-up between the two camps. And he wound up dead.
But as the 90s went on, Diddy would continue raising hell in the recording industry, and it would seem that no executives were off limits. 3 years later, on April the 16th, 1998, Diddy attacked music executive Steve Stout after Stout mistakenly sent MTV a controversial version of legendary New York rapper and Queens native Nas's Hate Me Now music video, which featured Diddy and depicted him as Jesus Christ being crucified. According to former Compton police officer who later became Death Row Records head of security, Reggie Wright Jr., Diddy consulted with his preacher that if he put out a video of him on the cross, the video would be his downfall.
But the main thing that y'all know Steve Stout's for is he's the gentleman that Puffy got mad about the video when he was put on the cross, and how, you know, you go and film something, then I think he said he wanted to talk to his reverend or his preacher or his pastor or something like that, and he told him that won't be a good look for him, and he kind of predicted that you're gonna have a downfall because of that, being on that cross. Maybe it's coming true in 2024.
Furious that this part of the video had not been edited out, Diddy confronted Stout in his New York office, where he and 2 associates assaulted him with a phone. Diddy would state that he handled the situation poorly and later publicly apologized, with Stout dropping the charges. But it was rumored that Diddy actually paid $500,000 to Stout and was ordered to attend a 1-day anger management class. The cycle of Diddy being associated with chaos in the streets and in the boardroom was just beginning, however. As lives had already been lost in connection with Diddy's activities, from here, more innocent people would continue to be harmed as a result of Diddy's behavior, and the next incident would become one of the most high-profile incidents of Diddy's career so far, leaving numerous lives ruined, both strangers and the people that were supposedly closest to him. On the 27th of December 1999, Diddy and his girlfriend at the time, global pop star Jennifer Lopez, and his bad boy artist Jamal Shine Barrow were at a club in New York when a confrontation escalated after Diddy apparently knocked a drink out of the hands of a local gangster named Matthew Scar Allen. This sparked an argument during which Allen actually threatened Shine, and somebody apparently threw money in Diddy's face. Chaos would ensue, and all 3 men reportedly drew guns, and someone would allegedly fire 3 shots in the packed club, injuring 3 people. Diddy was arrested with 2 9mm guns in his car and ended up facing 4 weapons charges, along with accusations of bribing his driver to take the blame for the guns. Although a witness claimed to have seen both men firing their weapons, Diddy himself was actually acquitted of all the charges in 2001. This was because differing stories emerged on his role in the shooting, with him stating that he did not own nor possess a gun on the said night. His girlfriend Jennifer Lopez would make headlines for her supposed night in hell, while Shine was the one who truly suffered, being convicted on 5 out of 8 counts and sentenced to a brutal 10 years in prison. Now, before we dive into what happened to Shine after his conviction, let's take a step back and get to know this man. Shine, a name that used to echo through the halls of hip-hop, once stood alongside Diddy as the next big thing on Bad Boy Records. But his story took a turn that very few could have predicted. His gritty style and undeniable talent, along with comparisons to the legendary Biggie Smalls, all pointed to a bright future. And yet, one night at a club in New York would change everything, ultimately landing him in prison for 10 years, followed by a swift deportation. Now, if you want a much deeper refresher on the events that brought Shine to that moment, you can go and check out my full video that I did on this a few years back. But the short of it is that Shine ultimately ended up taking the fall for the shooting, Diddy got off scot-free, and Shine served 10 years in prison, being released in 2009, with his life taking a dramatic turn. In a 2022 interview with Rolling Stone, Shine summed up his journey, saying, "I've been training for this my entire life because I grew up with one of the greatest CEOs ever in Diddy." However, in a recent statement in September 2024, after the barrage of Diddy's sexual misconduct allegations, Shine would voice that his former mentor actually destroyed his life, particularly regarding that 1999 New York nightclub shooting incident.
Let us not lose sight of what the cold hard facts are. This was not someone who I vacationed with and who he and I enjoyed this great intimate relationship of brotherhood. This is someone who destroyed my life.
Shine would recall that despite not having a close relationship with Diddy, he was swept up in a night that ultimately led to his conviction and nearly a decade in prison, while Diddy was acquitted. He alleged that Diddy called witnesses in against him, contributing to his imprisonment. And despite these feelings, Shine, now a leader in Belizean politics, stated that he had indeed forgiven Diddy because he recognized Diddy's potential to contribute to Belize through educational and developmental investments. In November the 5th, 2024, in an interview with Channel 5 Belize, Shine's true feelings would once again come out about his disappointment, stating that he was the fall guy in the 1999 nightclub shooting in New York, and in a statement, he would maintain his innocence in that shooting all these decades later, actually thanking Diddy for all he'd done for the people of Belize and saying that he hoped justice would be served for both Diddy and the alleged victims. Shine's story says a lot about the misguided loyalty that those close to Diddy gave to him, but if you read between the lines of Shine's graceful statements, you begin to see that duplicitous side of Diddy shining through. This is a man who throws stones and hides his hand, and will happily let those closest and most loyal to him have their lives destroyed to preserve Diddy's image and freedom. And with Diddy getting off scot-free in this case, zero lessons were learned, and as we get into the 2000s, we'll see Diddy in and out of court more than ever, as this untouchable Teflon Titan only got more bold and belligerent in his selfish and destructive behavior.